if we look at the overall market, the landscape for circular polymers, quite a lot has been happening and is currently happening from various angles of the emerging industry. There's certainly activities from the brand owners, the consumer packaged goods manufacturers, but also from retailers looking into novel packaging solutions. Overall, the chemical industry is exploring various avenues for recycling, be it mechanical or chemical. And obviously, there are different players in the value chain who try to configure new business models. And the key question clearly is, what are some of the opportunities that arise? And if so, where is the potential for extracting profits out of the potential circular business models? In the next 10 minutes, I will give a cursory and brief overview of the landscape, as well as some of the challenges, opportunities, and potential new business models which we see emerging. So if we look at the overall drivers of circularity, there's clearly the awareness of end consumers, and we do a yearly study of consumer sentiment. What has been growing is clearly not only the awareness of end consumers, but also their willingness to pay. That has gone up dramatically, and end consumers clearly demand more sustainable, quote unquote, solutions. What we also see is a dramatic increase in brand owner voluntary commitments. I think the first one which really made headlines was Coca-Cola in terms of polyethylene for their bottles, but it's growing as we speak, and in various forms. It can be sort of recycled pure material. It can be multi-material concepts, especially in automotive manufacturing. Volvo is one example. And also consumer packaged good companies such as Procter & Gamble, Henkel, Beiersdorf, Unilever, as part of their overall sustainability agendas, and their sort of respective purpose statements for their individual product lines, they're all looking to increase and improve not only their sustainability footprint, but as part of that, sustainable and circular solutions, not only for packaging, to be precise, and for polymers, but for the overall ecological footprint as part of, if you look at the climate discussion, their net zero commitments. The other main driver, ESG, so environmental, societal, and governance. All the investors basically require some shape or form of ESG commitment. If they look into shares and companies in which they would like to invest. As we all know, ESG is a wide field, and there are a lot of definitions out there, and also a lot of different criteria, especially if you look at the environmental side, what the investment managers actually require on that front. But just to give a simple example, which also relates to the chemical industry and packaging, quite a lot of the investment funds actually have a certain threshold for investments in bottled water, which all comes in plastic packages. So what we clearly see is there will be an intensified scrutiny in terms of ESG conformity. And that is another clear driver of circular business models. The other one I mentioned, the European Commission, just a couple of months back, it's even weeks, as part of their overall commitment to achieving net zero, has accelerated the respective steps to achieve net zero. As we all know, the polymer industry is not a big contributor to carbon dioxide emission. Nevertheless, it is part of the overall regulation and the objective to go net zero pretty quickly. And then, obviously, one of the key drivers, and I also firmly believe that this will drive volumes and new alliances as well as business models, is regulatory pressure. And I will come to that shortly. It comes in different shapes and forms, like bans, quotas, taxations, EPRs. And clearly, that is also driving the circular economy. And it is clearly also not the last word which has been spoken in terms of regulation. And then lastly, circular technology development. There is a lot of innovation, not only from startups. We have, in the latest count, have seen 100 sizable recycling technology startups, not including established players, which also have a stream of innovations, companies like Tomra for sorting, just to name one. There is a lot of innovation, and there's also a lot of innovation from chemical manufacturers as well as brand owners, which is either in the commercialization space or leaving the lab for certain polymers. So expect more to come, expect volumes to go up, but that to make the circular economy work, it requires different forms of collaboration. As I mentioned, and the regulatory framework differs not only by trading bloc, but by country. It also differs in terms of which parts of the value chain is thought or sought to be regulated. And that clearly adds to the complexity to make circular business models work with a respective scope and scale. So just to name a few, so you see bans in terms of single-use plastics. That has been clearly the most prominent one. I think one of the key drivers for an uptake in circular would be quotas, which have not been widely applied yet, except for batteries, for instance. And if that would come or would be realized in terms of polymers, clearly that would accelerate the market compared to bans, which basically simply substitute one material for another. And as we all know, you can debate whether this is then always the most sustainable solution. Nevertheless, quotas, I think that will be a major field in the foreseeable future. Taxation as an indirect mechanism is clearly also applied, be it as tax incentives or surplus taxes. And then as mentioned, the EPR schemes. What we also see is from the brand owner side, a clear acceleration in terms of simple count, but also volumes of sustainable and circular materials to be used either in packaging or certain polymer applications. So that's picking up. And overall, we see an acceleration of circularity from a nascent field to a field which moves up in the business model life cycle. So if we look at the overall sort of industry, which is currently to a certain extent already somewhat circular, but not fully circular, We have raw materials, in the case of polymers, to a large extent based on fossil hydrocarbons. The chemical industry, starting with the steam cracker, the converter, the brand owner, which uses polymers for packaging, but also for polymer applications in, for instance, cosmetics and personal care. The end consumer, and then the waste manager. Waste managers, I think, a field which has seen innovation more from the machinery and industrial equipment manufacturers, not so much in terms of sort of applying new models for better sortation of waste streams. But as we shall see shortly in the presentation, a lot of alliances and collaboration is springing up between different players in the value chain to basically close the loop throughout the full material life cycle. What we also see, and I think that is a driver as well, in terms of how the market develops, there is a clear quest for designing for circularity, be it standardized grades and better separation of material or mono materials. Clearly, if the quotas and the offtake agreement for recycled materials increase as they continue to increase, it's all about getting properly sorted waste streams as feedstock. And that has an impact on waste managers to acquire respective and sufficient volumes to feed assets. And it's probably also a question, if you look at, regardless if it's chemical or mechanical recycling, is there an opportunity to share assets between producers to enable total material solutions? Let's take, for instance, a simple example, polystyrene food grade. You need quite significant volumes. I think the technical concept is relatively mature, and also from an ecological footprint, a good one. Nevertheless, the question is sort of how do you acquire enough material to run a properly designed as well as dimensioned recycling facility profitable. Clearly also reverse logistics is a topic because we're not only looking at scope 1 and 2 emissions, but scope 3 as well. And I think that calls for innovation on the side of the waste managers. Sort of, as I like to call it, sort of taking the waste outside of the house. If we look at packaging, sort of the average packaging waste per person in the EU, I think it differs between sort of 170 kilograms a year per person to 250 in Germany, which is the highest one. On the chemical recycling side, assets need to be built and scaled up, especially if they are about to leave the lab. I think just to give one example on chemical recycling, OMV with ReOil chemical recycling is currently in sort of the first phase of scale up, but there is much more, just to mention one. And the overall topic clearly is value chain collaboration, from cradle to cradle, from product design to recycling solutions, including digital technology, because the physical world of cradle to cradle needs to be underpinned by digital to track and trace material and use technologies such as digital watermarks, which are currently piloted, for instance, by Procter & Gamble. And also trading platforms might be a solution to better track and trace and acquire and manage waste streams and volumes properly sorted. All right. So, and that also overall called for a systematic circular capability throughout the entire value chain. Just if we look at the total end of life cycle materials, plastics, there is still way to go in terms of overall recycling material. So there is, I think, upside potential, especially on the polymer side. As mentioned, I think in terms of recycling technology, quite a lot of it is already out there. Just take an example, polystyrene recycling, building insulation. There is a concept out there which would allow for mobile chemical recycling of polystyrene used in building insulation. Nevertheless, the business model needs to be established. And therefore, I think that is part of the market which is taking up. So on the recycling technology side, there is obviously mechanical dissolution, depolymerization, and cracking breakdown applicable for different polymers. Technologies are out there. And I think the field is developing quite rapidly. Nevertheless, it is also another part of the complexity in making those new business models work. And to a certain extent, I think it also calls for clearly collaboration, not only across the value chain, but also in the development of proper recycling facilities to actually make them work, not only from a capital investment perspective, but from a total asset lifecycle perspective. So, and this is already happening. I think not a week passes without a new announcement where we see collaborations between chemical firms and waste managers, startups for certain technologies, including waste managers, packaging producers, brand owners, and waste managers for certain packaging solutions. So these are just the archetypes, and not only theoretical archetypes, but very practical ones, which are already in the design or implementation phase. And the key message here clearly is the potential of the market requires these collaborations across the value chain. And that is a model which is probably very different to the one which is, quote unquote, the legacy model of the industry. So from a design to circularity perspective, on all of these topics, all firms are currently working. So extending the life cycle, increasing the resource efficiency, certification mechanisms, as I mentioned, watermarks for better tagging and sorting, separability in multi-material applications, but also in polymers and polymer solutions, which work with quite a different array of additives. The sortability is clearly one where the machinery manufacturers are quite engaged in. And I think there is a lot of innovation on that part as well. And then bio-based and recycled feedstock as new material. So we see quite a lot of movement there. And to sum it up, potentially one other topic is on the shared asset side, given that all these processes are at least energy intensive, to get to the best possible eco footprint, power purchase agreements for green electricity are also a topic which can and should be shared across value chain partners. So the race is on. It is also a race for applications for secondary materials. It's a race for the respective partnerships with waste managers and logistics providers for homogeneous raw materials, sortation, for technologies in application, and lastly, for innovations in circular solutions. And I firmly believe that this is a field where we see much more innovation in the next decade. With that, thanks very much for listening in, and back to Jan Willem, I guess.